Good evening. I'm James Exum. I'm at my home here in South Austin, Texas. I'm about to give a discourse, my latest discourse in my series of yoga philosophy on the subject of paradoxes that occur in the study of yoga and in the writings of yoga. This discourse will be titled The Human Mind's Capitulation to the Soul. And it'll be a discourse on consciousness, witnesshood, and liberation. And I utilize within some of my discourses, and in this one particularly, the commentary of Shankara, who was the 8th century writer and profound student of yoga and the writings of yoga. So we'll go ahead and just start. Introduction. In the labyrinth of human experience, the relationship between the mind and the soul emerges as one of the most profound inquiries. The perennial question, who am I, has animated the contemplative traditions of East and West speculation by their philosophers, calling forth insights of luminous clarity and paradoxical subtlety. In this discourse, we explore the theme of the mind's submission to the soul, or Sakshi, the witnessing consciousness, drawing upon the evocative narrative styles of the Advaitin sage, Adi Shankara, and myself as a yoga scholar. I have over 50 years of work with yoga, and the physical and the intellectual side of it, as a yogic philosopher. I am a contemporary yoga and a philosophical narrator, and I bring insight from the ancient to the modern terrain of self-exploration. I echo the primacy of the witnessing consciousness, urging seekers to look beyond the transient mind towards an inner clarity. The mind is, I'm quoting myself here, the mind is a brilliant storyteller, and true freedom lies in watching the story unfold without believing we are its main character. That's a little paradoxical in itself, and that's okay. Maybe we'll do one exclusively on that in some future video. The act of witnessing is the doorway to liberation. My narratives emphasize the necessity of stepping back from thought and gently observing the patterns of thought as though you're witnessing clouds drifting across the sky. My approach harmonizes with Shankara, both as an advocate for radical detachment, not as indifference, but as an intimate participation in consciousness without entanglement, I elucidate in my video descriptions the journey towards realizing the Atman, which is another name for the soul, the innermost self, is not about escaping thought, but about embracing the silent witness within. Well, sometimes the witness is silent, but I often have spoken in my videos of the witness being the little quiet voice within that whispers suggestions to you. As a child, you may have heard that voice, or maybe not heard that voice when it would say, no, no, no. Didn't mom say, don't eat those cookies, you're about to have supper here in an hour or so? Well, that is your soul speaking to you. I truly believe that. It also sometimes warns you, say if you're driving along in a car. With my Parkinson's, I'm no longer allowed to drive. I've submitted my license to the state of Texas, so now I'm chauffeured about by various means. I pay people to take me, so to speak, not chauffeured in the true sense. But sometimes as a driver, I remember I'm thinking about something, and this little voice pops into my consciousness, into my mind, so to speak, and says, hey, Exum, pay attention. Don't you see that's a red light in front of you, and there's cars crossing in front of you? And I would snap to and say, oh, thank you. And I'd come back to myself instead of being out of mind, so to speak, in some type of casual meditation or escapist thoughts. In my view, the Atman is the ultimate observer, a boundless field of awareness from which all experience arises and to which all returns. My reflections underscore the belief that liberation is less a task and more of a remembrance, an uncovering of what has always been present. I like that word uncovering, because if you break down the word discover, that means to uncover. To disagree means not to be in agreement. To discover means not to have a cover. So uncovering and discovering to me are very close in their meaning and their actions. Such insights from my digital teachings illuminate the perennial wisdom of Shankara. He's one of my heroes, one of the people I follow. Both invite us to step into the luminous, when I say us, I'm talking about you as seekers and me as an old yogi, to step into the luminous clarity of our own witness and consciousness, where the soul or the Atman is ever present, serene and utterly free. That's the beauty of being the soul. Thus, between Shankara's ancient wisdom and my modern contemplations, the principle of Sakshi emerges as a timeless invitation to ground the restless mind in the spaciousness of pure awareness. Not a bad sentence I crafted there. Through a tapestry of quotes, commentaries, and references, we shall traverse the intricate terrain of mind and soul, reasoning and witnessing bondage and liberation. So now we're going to get into the meat of the matter. The paradox of the crossroads of mind and soul, exploring the enigma of human consciousness. So first we'll define the mind and soul. We'll do this with a series of bullet points. The mind in contemporary discourse, the mind is largely understood as the seat of cognition, perception, emotion, and consciousness. It is the platform upon which our thoughts, memories, and rational processes play out. Materialism, and that is a subject, a theory, an oft-time quoted work, suggests that the mind is a product of the brain's neural processes. And that comes from Rene Descartes' theory and writings under the title of Dualism. Bullet point next. The soul, on the other hand, is traditionally regarded as the immaterial essence of the individual, the divine spark or the seat of our deepest identity. Different cultures and religions ascribe varying attributes to the soul. It is immortal, ineffable, and the ultimate repository for meaning and value. Now we're going to go through a historical perspective of this. This is one of my subcategory titles. From Plato's immortal forms and Aristotle's tripartite soul to Descartes' dualism and the Eastern traditions of Atman and Kui, perspectives on mind and soul are as diverse as they are profound. I may not have pronounced the word Kui properly, but you can look it up, QI. It may be we. Plato posited that the soul existed from birth and would endure after death. Well, I agree with that. While Aristotle integrated the soul into the biological processes of living beings, seeing it as the principle of life and movement. Well, there's another subject to be discussed in the future. Descartes, meanwhile, famously split reality into the res cognitions, the thinking thing, the mind or soul. The thinking thing, the mind or soul. He actually saw them as possibly being the same thing with different names. And the res extensa, the extended thing, which is a form of matter. I don't see the mind or the soul as having matter. I don't look at them in that light at all. The paradox of dualism. At the core of the mind-soul debate lies the paradox of dualism. How can the intangible, immaterial soul, see there we are with immaterial, which is it's a more proper concept of the soul, In fact, it is the only concept that is proper. Immaterial soul interact with the tangible physical mind or brain. Well, the physical mind is an oxymoron. There is no physical mind. Again, the mind is an ethereal thing. The brain is physical. The brain has mass. The soul is, the mind is more of a spiritual aspect, in my opinion. If the soul is truly separate, by what mysterious agency does it exert influences on thoughts and actions? Conversely, if the mind is purely material, what becomes of the notion of the soul? Well, that's sort of a silly sentence there, but I had to put it in because I found it somewhere and I wanted to quote it into my text. Conversely, if the mind is purely material, which it is not, what becomes of the notion of the soul? This logical conundrum, known as the interaction problem, has bedeviled philosophers for centuries, and it is still doing that. The work that's being done trying to define the consciousness right now is very much a part of this belief system and questionable work that needs to be explained somehow scientifically or psychologically or however they want to go about it. If causality is a function of physical laws, how can a non-physical entity such as the soul initiate or respond to material events? Well, God is non-material. So how does he respond to physical events? To material events even. And if all mental events are reducible to neurochemical processes, does that not undermine the soul's autonomy and significance? Again, something to be debated and thought about and argued about, and you can make a career out of arguing. Lawyers do it, philosophers do it, judges do it. Of course, they're high-end lawyers, people that deal with scientific theories. Einstein made almost a lifelong career out of theories. Yet the paradox exists. The scientific worldview tilts towards materialism, often regarding the soul as a poetic metaphor or an artifact of archaic belief. Can you believe that the scientific worldview is stating something like the soul is an artifact of an archaic belief? Well, they'll find out, won't they? Yet the paradox persists. If consciousness here, now we're getting into the paradox. This is the meat on the table. This is the main meal. This is the main deal that we're dealing with here. Yet the paradox persists. If consciousness is merely an emergent property of physical processes, why does it feel so profoundly subjective, so irreducibly first person? The hard problem of consciousness, why and how subjective experiences arise, remains stubbornly unsolved by modern science, who seemingly or openly ignore yoga philosophy as the oldest known science. So if you want to make a career about a question of philosophy or a theory, you sure as hell don't want to find the answer to it anywhere near the beginning of your career. You want to keep the game going, so to speak. I once asked Vincent Harris was the Bishop of Austin in my young days, and he was one of the people that came to see me every once in a while, and I went to see him. I once asked him the question, Bishop, how is it in the book of Genesis that the plants and everything started growing and were introduced into the world before the sun came about, before light was able to help them grow? And he looked at me with a, sort of a semi-smile on his face. And he said, "Oh, James, in Catholicism, that's what we call taking a leap of faith." In other words, don't ask too many questions, just believe what you're taught. Quantum mysteries and the soul. Some thinkers, notably in the realm of quantum theory, have speculated that consciousness may play a fundamental role in the workings of the universe. That consciousness may play a fundamental role in the workings of the universe. Well, I can tell you it does, because without consciousness, you would not know that there is a working universe. Of course, it plays a part. Not only that, but the ultimate consciousness is Brahman, the creator. He is the ultimate consciousness, and he definitely plays a part in not only the creation and the preservation of the universe, but in the day-to-day workings of the universe. The observer effect and the non-locality of quantum entanglement have sparked new debates about the nature of mind and its possible connection to the universal soul. Well, again, there's Brahman, or consciousness. While these ideas are highly speculative, see, the scientists are always speculating, and they're hard nuts to crack, and no offense to nuts. They reignite age-old questions about the unity or duality of mind and soul. Of course they do. This keeps them employed. This keeps the grants and the paychecks and the lecture circuit rolling along. What was that that we were talking about? It plays a part in the unresolved mysteries of the universe. Some thinkers, notably in the realm of quantum, have speculated that consciousness may play a fundamental role in the workings of the universe. That's what I was looking for. Spiritual and religious perspectives. For many world religions, the mind and the soul are intimately connected, yet distinct. In Christianity, the soul is the immortal aspect, destined for salvation or damnation. Well, in yoga, there is no salvation or damnation. There is just simply being. Brahman, the creator in yoga philosophy, does not condemn you to hell. There is no hell in the yoga philosophy, and there's no heaven. There's no nirvana. That's more on the Buddhist side of thinking. Mind is both a gift and a battleground. In Hinduism, again, I'm not a Hindu and I'm not a follower of Hinduism. Atman, the soul, is the ultimate reality. Well, we agree there. While the mind is the instrument through which life's illusions, Maya, are perceived, Buddhist philosophy, meanwhile, often denies a permanent soul, instead exploring the continuous flow of consciousness, mind, flow of consciousness, which is mind in parentheses, as a series of impermanent states. Well, there we disagree. The paradox of self and identity. The paradox deepens when considering the nature of self and identity. Who am I? The sum of memories, the ineffable essence of the soul. Then we're going to move on now, because I'm being redundant there. But the mind does grapple with change, growth, and loss, whereas the soul is conceived as eternal and unchanging. Yet the two seem bound together, each incomplete without the other. And there's one more thing I want to say from that paragraph. If the former, then the soul dies with the body. If the latter, then what connects my immortal soul to my finite experience? The mind grapples with change, growth, and loss. So we'll move on now. Psychological and existential views. Existentialist philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger have interrogatively addressed the paradoxes of existence, positing that meaning arises from the tension between the finite and the infinite, the temporal and the eternal. In psychotherapy, the dialogue between the mind and soul can be seen in the quest for wholeness, purpose, and self-acceptance. Well, one of my favorite scientists and doctors, in fact, my favorite psychologist, is Dr. Carl Jung. And I've studied him for years, and he has helped me solve a lot of my personal problems by reading his works and applying his ideas to myself. Carl Jung, for instance, explored the concept of the psyche as a dynamic interplay between conscious and unconscious processes, linking individuation, the integration of the self, to a spiritual journey that borders on the soul's domain. Well, Carl Jung was a great follower of yoga and wrote a couple of books with yoga as part of the subject matter. And he was a great follower. So were a lot of other scientists that I have known of or have actually physically known. In his logotherapy, he argued that the search for meaning is a quintessentially human trait, one that transcends mere mental processes, and it touches the soul. The search for meaning touches the soul, according to Dr. Carl Jung. The paradox in everyday experience and the poetic texture of daily life, the paradox of mind and soul, is experienced in moments of awe, love, creativity, and suffering. When we contemplate art and beauty or the infinite reaches of space, we sense a yearning that eludes rational explanation. In grief or joy, we feel depths that seem to echo from beyond the boundaries of the mind. This experience points to an intricate connection, one that resists definition, yet it consists upon itself as a yet it insists upon itself as I backed myself into a corner there, didn't I? But that's all right, I'll figure this out. But insists upon itself as a reality. Reconciling the paradox. Can the mind and the soul ever be reconciled? Some contemporary thinkers advocate for a non-dualistic approach, wherein mind and soul are two aspects of a deeper, unified reality. Others prefer to maintain a tension, seeing paradox not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be lived. Well, I see it that way. Perhaps the paradox is essential, reminding us that the human being is more than the sum of all their parts. The mind offers clarity, logic, and analysis. The soul brings depth, mystery, and meaning. Together they form the tapestry of human existence, a tapestry woven from threads both tangible and transcendent. Now, this is a long conclusion, but I'm going to go ahead and start it. It's several parts. Shankara, the witness, consciousness, Sakshi, and the mirage of the mind. Shankara, the 8th century proponent of Advaita Vedanta, placed his concept of Sakshi, the witness, at the core of his metaphysical vision. His commentaries on the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras consistently remind us that the mind, manas, is but an instrument, a flickering flame before the unchanging radiance of Atman, the self, the soul. The mind is but an organ of perception, itself perceived by the ever-present witness. Now I'm going to go back and correct my writing there. I said an organ of perception. It is, I should have said a metaphysical organ of perception. Or I should have said an inorganic organ of perception, an inorganic thing of perception, an inorganic entity of perception. It's self-perceived by the ever-present witness, the Sakshi, who alone is real. And that comes from Shankara's Viveka Chudamani, verse number 98. In Shankara's view, all mental phenomena, thoughts, desires, emotions, are modifications of prakriti, which is nature. These are ephemeral, rising and dissolving like waves upon the ocean, while the Sakshi remains untouched, observing the drama without attachment or aversion. The Atman is the witness of the mind's activity, but is not itself the mind, just as light reveals objects, but not affected by them. So the Atman illumes the mind, yet remains ever free. And that's from Shankara's Atman Bodhi, verse 10. The process of the mind is submitting to the process of the mind submitting to the soul is for Shankara a movement of discernment, which is Viveka. It is the realization that the mind cannot know itself independently. Only Sakshi, the pure witness, the pure consciousness, can reveal the nature of the mind. When the intellect, the buddhi, is purified by discrimination, it recognizes its own limitations and bows before Sakshi, the eternal observer, the eternal witness. And that's from Shankara's commentary on Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Practical implications, meditating and witnessing. The practice prescribed by Shankara is one of attentive detachment. I utilize that myself, and I would gladly share that with the world. In fact, I'll start doing that, hopefully. Through meditation, the aspirant observes the flow of thoughts without identification, gradually revealing the abiding process of the Sakshi. Let the mind dissolve in the witness as darkness vanishes before the rising sun. Shankara, Upanishad, Sahasri, verse 19.7. This detachment does not imply indifference. That's probably chapter 19, verse 7. This detachment does not imply indifference, but a radical freedom from the compulsions of thought. As Shankara writes, liberation, moksha, blossoms when the mind ceases to claim sovereignty and instead bows to the true master, the self. Well, that's the title of this. Once the ego, the ego is a process of the mind. Once the mind bows to the soul, then it is capitulating, and that is the title of this work. Now, here comes some of my opinions. We just had Shankara's opinions. Now we're going to have some of mine. I approach the soul as windless, unwavering presence. This is echoing Eastern notions of Sakshi, yet infusing them with the imagery and rhythm of Western verse. My narrative, while distinct from Shankara's analytic discourse, converges on the same paradox. The mind, brilliant and restless, cannot touch the soul, cannot comprehend its death, except by surrendering its ceaseless activity. Submission, in my lexicon, is not defeat, but a poetic homecoming. Let that sink in for a moment. Submission is not defeat, but a poetic homecoming when it comes to the mind giving way to the predominance of the soul. The mind's struggle and the soul's acceptance. I often portray the mind as a fretful child, that's in quotations, eager to create and control, yet longing for the silent embrace of the soul. That's another pretty one. The act of submission is likened to the shedding of masks, the relinquishing of narratives. This passage is reminiscent of Shankara's assertion that knowledge is not the accumulation of thought, but the cessation of thought in the recognition of the witness. Knowledge is not the accumulation of thought, but the cessation of thought in recognition of the witness. Carl Gustav Jung, Dr. Jung, whose psychological odyssey ventured to the deepest recesses of the psyche, found in the soul both mystery and authority, a numinous center beyond the confining reach of conscious thought. For Jung, the mind, with its tireless striving and rational construct, stands as only a fragile vessel afloat on the fathomless waters. The soul, Jung writes, is for so many people not at all a reality, but merely a vague possibility. Nobody really knows what it is. Well, he was not one of those people, nor am I. And if you are, then you may be on the wrong path. But then again, people change as their knowledge base expands. In Jung's vision, the moment of true transformation occurs when the mind excuse me. Occurs when the mind, I'm sorry about that cough. I have Parkinson's, Parkinsonian-like disease, and it affects my vocal cords. So when I read for a while, sometimes I I just go totally dry in my vocal cords. They have to be moistened, and I usually keep a cup of ginseng tea next to me when I'm reading these and narrating. For Jung, the mind with its tireless striving and rational construct stands as only a fragile vessel afloat on fathomless water. The soul, Jung writes, is for so many people not at all a reality, but merely a vague possibility. Nobody really knows what it is. In Jung's vision, the moment of true transformation occurs when the mind relinquishes its illusionary dominion and submits to the archetypal wisdom of the self, which is the soul, the greater power whose presence radiates from the unconscious, whose symbols of dreams guide the individual beyond the limits of ego. The process he calls individuation is itself a journey of surrender, where the ego, humbled by its inadequacies, bows before the profundity of the soul, discovering therein a source of meaning that cannot be manufactured and controlled. Dr. Jung's insight resonates with Shankara and myself. The surrender of the restless mind is not defeat, but revelation. The soul, in Jung's language, is the mediator between consciousness and unconsciousness. The witness, whose presence reconciles opposites, dissolves inner conflict, and ushers in greater wholeness. To give way in this sense is to be led out of isolation through the labyrinth of symbols into the embrace of something immeasurable. The mind in its openness becomes not diminished, but expanded, an instrument attuned to the harmonies of the soul's orchestra. Well, that's more my poetry in writing, isn't it? My poetic style invites the reader to rest within the soul's quietude and let the mind dissolve like mist at dawn. Sources and intersections. Both Shankara and myself offer complementary perspectives on the theme of witnesshood. Shankara's metaphysical rigor finds a resonance in my lyrical tenderness. The Upanishads echo through Shankara's prose, and quote, "He who sees the witness within never again identifies with the mind." That's Shankara's commentary on the Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6, verse 12. The nature of submission from bondage to freedom. To allow the mind's inferior position beneath the soul, is both traditions, the path from bondage to freedom. The mind, when identified with its contents, is bound by fear, desires, and limitations. The soul, as Sakshi, is ever free, luminous, and unconditioned. Bondage, this is a quote, is not in the world nor in the mind, but in the ignorance of the existence of the witness. Freedom dawns when the witness is recognized. That's Shankara Viveka Chudalamani, verse 241. Throughout the tapestry of yogic philosophy, the motive of the mind surrendered to the Atman, the innermost self, reverberates with persistent clarity. From the earliest Upanishads, this theme is woven into the guidance of sages, seated in silent meditation, proclaimed the supremacy of the witness self over the restless mind. Well, of course, the mind is eternal. The mind is temporal. It only exists as long as the body exists, the brain exists. The soul is eternal. So there's in my opinion, there's the justification of the superiority and the placement on the ladder of importance. If the soul is eternal and the mind is simply transient, then how could any thinking human being think that the mind is superior to the soul? That's it in a nutshell, in my opinion. This theme is woven in the guidance of sages who, seated in silent meditation, proclaimed the supremacy of the witnessing self over the restless mind. Well, of course I do. In the Chandogya Upanishad, the analogy of the mind as a river merging into the sea finds itself, just as streams lose their names and forms upon meeting the ocean. So does the mind in surrender dissolve into the Atman, which is the soul, boundless expanse. The Kapha Upanishad too presents the chariot metaphor. It's a very, I need to do an entire short video, but still a video on this metaphor, the chariot metaphor. The body, and here's how it goes: the body is the chariot, the senses are the horses, and the mind is the reins that hold the horses in check. But the Atman, the soul, is seated as the passenger within the chariot, and is the true master, silent, observing, and untouched. Well, mostly silent, but occasionally suggesting through whispers. Only when the intellect offers its reins to the Atman does the journey reach its ultimate destination. Well, the intellect is part of the mind. Later in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the process of Chitta Vritta Narada, stilling the fluctuation of the mind, becomes the essential means of approaching the Purusha, the witnessing consciousness. Brahman is sometimes spoken of as the Purusha, the creator, or the Purusha, and Prakriti is nature. So there's Purusha, Prakriti when you get into that higher level of yoga philosophy dealing with the upper stratum. The witnessing consciousness. Patanjali's aphorism stressed that liberation, kaivalya, is attained not through the annihilation of the mind, but through its quiet acquiescence to the observer within. As the mind ceases its constant commentary, the Purusha shines forth, unclouded and serene. Another pretty line. The Bhagavad Gita, a seminal text of yogic wisdom, reiterates the surrender. Krishna instructs Arjuna to offer all thoughts and actions to the higher self. Quote, the mind, once controlled, becomes the friend of the self, which is uncontrolled. And as uncontrolled, it is the greatest enemy of the self. Here, the act of surrender is not passive, but an active orientation towards Atman's guidance, a willingness to abide in the silent witness. Well, that guidance I spoke of at the very beginning of this discourse, as when you're a child, well, that little voice comes to you and whispers, no, 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 don't eat those cookies. Don't you remember Mom said it'll spoil your appetite because the meal is coming up here in an hour or so. Adi Shankara's commentaries, bridging the Upanishadic and yogic traditions, illuminate the radical non-duality Advaita of the self and reinforce the necessity for the mind surrender. In Shankara's Vivikachudamani, the seeker is urged to discriminate the self from the non-self, and a recognition that the mind is but a tool, not the master. Shankara's poetic verses remind us the Atman is witnessed beyond the reach of thought. Let the mind bow in reverence to its true nature. Similarly, the Yoga Vasistha, a philosophical epic, narrates conversation between the sage Vasistha and his prince Rama, exploring the dissolution of mental construct in the presence of pure awareness. Here, liberation is portrayed as the effortless abiding in the witness. When the mind surrenders all notions, the self alone shines. The soul, the witness, the Atman, the Sakshi, those are all different words describing the same exact thing, which is the soul. Through these scriptural voices, the journey of the mind from agitation to surrender emerges as the axis upon which the yogic philosophy turns. That's just exactly right. The devotee is not asked to destroy the mind, but to lay it gently at the feet of Atman, to let its stories be illumined and ultimately transcended by the light of witnessing consciousness. And the labyrinth of human experience and relationship between the mind and soul emerges one of the most profound inquiries. That's a repeat of what I said earlier. The witnessing consciousness, drawn upon the evocative narrative styles of the Advaita sage Adi Shankara and myself, go to prove all of this time and time again. Now, in true conclusion, the silent witness and the song of mind, the narrative of Shankara and James Exum, myself, Truths separated by centuries and continents illuminate the same truth, the primacy of the witness, the Sakshi, the necessity of the mind's submission to it. For Shankara, this is the heart of non-dual realization. For myself, the soul is the listener who never interrupts, the gentle breeze that guides the mind home. In the words of Shankara, know yourself as the witness alone, and you shall know peace. May this discourse serve as a lamp for those who seek to understand the mystery of the mind and soul. And may the Sakshi within guide each seeker to the freedom. See, he is the guide also. That's when he tells the child, don't eat those cookies. He is guiding him down the right path, down the right dharma, and keeping him on the right side of karma. My reflection brings this insight in the language of experience. The process of submission is thus transformative. It is not the annihilation of the mind, but its harmonization with the soul's witnesshood. The mind becomes transparent as an instrument of the soul's knowing, no longer a veil, but a clear window. To contemplate the connection between the mind is to confront the paradox of what it means to be human. The mind measures, reasons, and remembers. The soul suggests and transcends the eternal witness. Ultimately, the paradox is not a flaw, but a feature, a testament to the richness of human consciousness and the enduring mystery at the heart of all being. And there it is. It's wrapped up, folks. Looks like this is going to be about a 45-minute discourse. I tried to keep them under 30, but this one was rather complex, and its complexity is a reflection of its importance. So I'll close, as I always do, by simply saying to you, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you did, that's wonderful. And if you did not, that's okay too. You're welcome to come back anytime. And you're welcome to double check everything I've said by going to Wikipedia and mentioning the subject I was talking on, or writing down notes and then checking it with your notes. And you can also go to Yogapedia. I get nothing from either one of those in compensation of any type, but I do utilize them often, and I suggest them very often. So if you enjoyed it, fine. If you didn't, that's okay too. But remember, be kind to each other, be kind to your family and your friends and even strangers. And hopefully if we practice that idea of being kind and civil, in a few years from now, we can all wake up in a world where it's all returned to the way it should be and was. And I have faith that it shall happen. I truly do. And thank you so much for your time and effort in visiting with me. And I will see you in my next video.